Next on American Black Journal, we'll introduce you to the Michigan Opera Theater's new artist in residence. He's a young African-American singer who is winning acclaim in the field of classical music. Plus, author Ishmael Reed talks about his book on the life and legacy of Muhammad Ali. Stay right there. American Black Journal starts now.
From Delta Faucets to Behr Paint, Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929.
Support also provided by the Cynthia and Etzel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit Public TV.
The DTE Foundation proudly supports 50 years of American Black Journal in covering African American history, culture, and politics. The DTE Foundation and American Black Journal partners in presenting African American perspectives about our communities and in our world.
Also brought to you by AAA, Nissan Foundation, Ally, Impact at Home, UAW Solidarity Forever, and viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson, and as always, I'm glad you've joined us. My first guest today has been called one of the most powerful voices of our time by the Los Angeles Times. Bass baritone Davóne Tynes is a classically trained singer who's been named Artist in Residence at the Michigan Opera Theater. He's also the winner of the 2020 Sphinx Medal of Excellence, which recognizes extraordinary classical musicians of color. Tynes' work is a mixture of opera, gospel, contemporary classical spirituals, and songs of protest. Here's a performance by Davóne, followed by my conversation with him.
Darkness will bring light where there is darkness. We'll bring light where there is darkness. We will bring light. Hallelujah.
Davóne Tynes, congratulations and welcome to American Black Journal.
Thank you so much. Good to see you.
Yeah, so it's exciting to have you here with us in Detroit as artist in residence at the Michigan Opera Theater. Tell us what that means and what you'll be experiencing while you do that.
Completely. It's a role I'm really excited to take on, and part of that has to do with the fact that I was invited into a conversation about how to create that role. And it all began with accepting a different role as Malcolm X in X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X by Anthony Davis and Talani Davis. And I was deeply excited to start on the journey of what it means to portray that figure in this city particularly. And then it made me think, well, what does that actually mean? What does it mean for me, someone who grew up in Virginia, but also travels around the world singing opera, to come here and portray a very Detroit person? I didn't want to just show up and put on some sort of show without having a larger understanding and connection to the lives and the communities and the histories here. So I wanted to make it a really critical point of this residency to be about meeting people in the Detroit area from many, many different walks of lives, from many different modes of working, creative and otherwise, in order to see what it meant for MOT, Michigan Opera Theater, to interact with the larger Detroit community over time, to build real relationships so that when we do this show, there's actually a community connection to what's happening.
Yeah. The relationship between Detroiters and the arts has always been really strong. And of course, we've produced lots of great art in many different forms here in Detroit. I'm not sure everybody thinks of classical music or opera, though, when they think about that. I imagine you would like to change that.
Completely. Something I've been really, really interested in for a long time is trying to figure out what is opera really, or what is the greater potential of opera. And I think part of that has to deal with going back to a deeper root of what opera was. And it has to deal with, the word opera in Italian means work. And a part of that definition has to deal with how can you bring together different mediums, different aesthetics, whether that's an orchestra or lighting or the grandiosity of a theater, to work, to focus on telling a story. So opera is in essence a really incredible way to tell a story. And often the stories that people know from opera are not something that people can really connect to. Maybe it's in German, maybe it's telling the story of a people that one doesn't see themselves in. So I'm trying to make it a priority for people to understand that opera is anything with intentional storytelling. And I think especially with this piece, X, it's an opportunity to put a story that isn't normally engaged, a story that I think many people today, especially Black people, can connect to, and saying, this is opera too. This deserves those resources. This deserves that sort of consideration. And so I think a way to save or redefine opera is to change what stories and what people are in the middle of it.
In addition, of course, there are not as many African Americans who work in the classical music space or in the operatic space as we'd like. Tell us how you became interested in this and decided that this is how you wanted to spend your life and express your art.
Definitely. Well, I grew up in Northern Virginia and singing in the Baptist church there. My grandfather was a church choir director, but also in the Navy for a long time. And he discovered that I had a unique voice. One day he sang kind of jokingly, "How are you?" And I said, "I am fine." And he thought, "Oh, whoa, you have something else going on there." And I didn't think that I wanted to sing or had anything to do with it, in a professional way. But he really encouraged me to figure out, what is classical singing, or what is a way of training my voice in order to communicate something. And then I also played violin for about 14 years and also sang in a lot of different church contexts, be it the Baptist church or the Greek Orthodox church, or even the Catholic shrine in Washington, D.C. And what I respond to, I think, most in music making is when it's done for a reason. And in the church, music is always made for a reason. It's in order to connect to our human and lived experience. So walking into an operatic context or the classical music world, I never fully saw it for what those stories were or what the content was. I saw it for its possibility. I saw, what is it if we can take an orchestra and put it with gospel, as people like Kirk Franklin have so brilliantly done? Or what is it if we take, the grandiosity of the theater and pay homage to stories that we just don't lift up as a society? So I've always been trying to engage it for the tools. And I think that also has to do with a larger tradition of Black people in America taking what's available to us in order to get along and do what we need to do. And what we need to do right now, I think, is tell stories that are going to change perspective on how we exist.
When you decided that this was what you wanted to do, was there any hesitation on your part, or were there barriers that people threw up in front of you as if to say, well, this is not what African Americans do. This is not what African American men do. Did you feel like you had to push through a resistance?
I think it was less about a barrier saying you can't do this because you are Black, but I do think there were barriers that were reflexive, saying that because you are not white, perhaps you don't know how to do this. And one aspect of that showed itself was when I was in conservatory at Juilliard. You're expected to sing, the standard repertoire, Italian songs and arias and German lied and French chanson. And I was assigned to sing some German songs. And it was hard for me to get into them because it was just assumed that, I would relate to love that way, or that I would want to do that through the German language. And I said, I am not a German white straight man. I don't experience love or even language this way. So why is this meant to be the building blocks or the tools through which I'm supposed to express myself? So it was an acknowledgement, even with colleagues continually, that to expect someone to embody identities far from them is possible. It's our work as performers or actors, but it also must be acknowledged that there is a removal and a distance there that my white colleagues do not have to partake in, that I do. So it's not to say that it shouldn't be done, but acknowledgement of what people's identity and perspective is as they walk into certain forms is always critical.
Yeah. So let's talk a little more about X, which is set to hit the stage here in Detroit in 2022. Is that right?
Yes.
Malcolm X set to opera. Right there, that's a provocative statement. Tell us what that's been like pulling this all together.
Completely. So the incredible Anthony Davis, Pulitzer Prize winning composer, and actually his cousin and common collaborator, Tulani Davis, I think that they have made a really unique mark in opera in telling Black stories. Anthony Davis won the Pulitzer for his opera Central Park 5, and just tackling a number of critical stories in that form. And as I was saying, I think what that form brings is attention and scale. So a character like Malcolm X deserves that attention and that scale. And I think the way that they've worked out how this piece exists does that in an incredible and special way. Anthony writes in a jazz idiom, essentially, but commingled with classical, which some people would say are different branches of the same tree. But I think it's going to be really incredible for audiences to experience what does it mean when you take a full symphonic orchestra with a jazz quartet or a jazz ensemble embedded in the middle and have that kind of expression blasted to that scale, all with the purpose of saying, this man's life and furthermore his mission are even beyond the scale of the resources we have available.
Yeah. And for you personally, playing this role, talk about how that feels.
Completely. I continue to find that being a performing artist is a deep blessing and a privilege in order to live out on stage emotions and ways of being that don't necessarily exist or that I wouldn't have the opportunity or venue to express otherwise. And being a Black man in America, being a Black person or marginalized identity in this country, as James Baldwin says, could fill someone with a sort of madness. And taking on this role, it allows a place to put all of that energy. Not to say that Malcolm X is mad, but I think he's often misconstrued as a person who had ill intent or malice. And one thing I continue to deeply respect in looking into his life and his work was that I think he really just aimed to be a mirror. He aimed to be a reflecting point of the world and of the time that he lived in. The first aria in the opera, titled "You Want the Truth, but You Don't Want to Know," talks about how his family and he had been through so much degradation at the hands of white people, his father being killed, his mother not being able to collect insurance on that hate crime of a death, and later being, driven to her own madness, and his family being disassembled by a white system that didn't have space for their particular quote unquote problems. All of what he did was motivated as a reaction, as a reflection of the energy put towards him. So he said, if my life had been torn asunder at these forces, why shouldn't I have access to those same forces in order to save or continue my life, but even more altruistically, the lives of my people?
This year marks the 5-year anniversary since the death of boxing great and activist Muhammad Ali. PBS Books, in partnership with the Association for the Study of African American Life and History and the Kaiga Foundation, recently celebrated the legacy of the world heavyweight boxing champ by hosting a conversation with author Ishmael Reed. His book, The Complete Muhammad Ali, explores the life of the activist and the athlete. I had the privilege of interviewing Reed for the event. Here's a portion of our conversation.
I want to start with just an overview of this wonderful work that you published in 2015, The Complete Muhammad Ali. It's a story about Ali that takes a very different arc, I think, than most of the things that I've read or seen about him. It is a very deliberate arc. Let's start with you talking about why you wanted to tell this story and why you chose to tell it this way.
Well, Stephen, I think that in this country, the Black story is told by others. And so Black opinion and the Black narrative is under a sort of like cultural occupation. And so I had to go to Montreal to get this book published. And it was supposed to be published in the United States, but that's another story. I thought that what I call the Ali scribes, I think mostly privileged white men who control the story about Ali, had left out important information. For example, the great influence that the Nation of Islam played upon his thinking. So, for example, I think that what Muhammad Ali did was to follow the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, and sort of like I don't want to use the term like parroted or like sort of like repeated the pronouncements of Elijah Muhammad. This part of his story is left out, and I think that the Nation of Islam is dismissed by what I call the Ali scribes, the people who have a monopoly over that his story, because they considered the Nation of Islam to be hate mongers.
And let's talk about that relationship. I think when you talk about Elijah Muhammad, you talk about the Nation of Islam. In popular American culture, the name that comes most to mind, of course, is Malcolm X, who is the most recognizable figure, I think, in the Nation of Islam. And I think people know a little more about the relationship he had with Elijah Muhammad than the one that Ali had. But catch us up on what that relationship was like, what it meant to Muhammad Ali, both in positive terms and sometimes in negative ones.
Well, Marvin X, who's a Black nationalist who actually knew both Ali and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, talks about an incident where he went to Chicago to interview Muhammad Ali, and after conferring with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Ali canceled the interview. So I think that what shows the influence that Elijah Muhammad had over Ali happened when he broke with Malcolm X. Malcolm X became an international figure and sort of like a television star. And a friend of mine, one of the people I interviewed named Joe Walker, he and I ran a newspaper in Buffalo, New York, said that when he worked for Muhammad Speaks, Malcolm X hired him. The people in Chicago felt that he was favoring Malcolm X over Elijah Muhammad. So Muhammad Ali was caught in that feud, and what he did, he chose to follow Elijah Muhammad. As a matter of fact, he mocked Malcolm X when they encountered each other in Africa.
And so relate that relationship, I guess, with Elijah Muhammad and with the Nation of Islam to the activism that we know defined so much of Ali's career. Of course, it's his personality and his strong independence and almost defiance that drives much of that. But his allegiance to the Nation of Islam also helps frame some of that activism.
Well, not participating in the war was policy. He was not the only follower of the Nation of Islam who took that position. As a matter of fact, Abdul Rahman, whom I interviewed, was the one who told him to tell the press, no Vietnamese ever called me the N-word.
I want to talk about the voices that you incorporate in this book, which are different from a lot of the voices that we've heard before talk about Muhammad Ali. Talk about the process of gathering those voices and how it helps you render the story in a really different way.
So I began the book in 2003, and I think it was published in 2015 or something like that. So it was a long process, but I was able to interview people who are left out, voices that are left out. I got in a lot of trouble for writing a play called The Haunting of Lin-Manuel Miranda. That's what we do. We point to parts of history that are left out of American history. Look at Tulsa, what happened there, where we uncovered, an atrocity or genocide that occurred in 1921. So we do the left out stuff, and that led me to interviewing people whose voices were not heard. For example, I went to a Black nationalist book fair that was organized by Marvin X in San Francisco, interviewed Amiri Baraka and a number of other people whose stories about Ali are not told.
And in a related note, PBS will air a new Ken Burns documentary about Muhammad Ali this fall. You can watch the 4-part series right here on Detroit Public Television, September 19th through the 22nd. That's going to do it for us this week. Thanks for watching. You can find out more about our guests at AmericanBlackJournal.org. And you can always connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter. We'll see you next time.